Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 318. Thank you for joining us. Today, Kolbe's own Neva Hernandez joins Bonnie and me to welcome Dr. Matthew Mehan to the Kolbecast. Dr. Mehan is a best-selling author and the Associate Dean and Professor of Government at the Van Andel Graduate School of Government at Hillsdale College's Washington, D.C. campus. As we come to our country's 250th birthday, we discuss history, poetry, and Dr. Mehan's new book, The American Book of Fables. This new book explores our country and its history through the eyes of American animals and has materials for littles, middles, and bigs, and with its beautiful illustrations can be enjoyed by the whole family. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Well, this morning it's a earlier recording than usual, but it's midweek, not a Monday morning early. So it's everything's great.
Yeah, it's a great way to start the day. Today we are visiting with Dr. Matthew Mehan, who is the author of a few books that our listeners may be familiar with, including one that is just recently published by Sophia Institute Press. Hi, Dr. Mehan. Welcome to the Kolbecast.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're very glad to have you. And we've brought in one of our Kolbe teachers and moms. We first met her in episode 192, so it's high over time to get her back on the Kolbecast. Neva Hernandez, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Very good to see you again. We're going to catch up with Neva here for a second because it has been such a long time since you first came to visit with us. Remind us, Neva, about yourself and your Kolbe connection and how you serve Kolbe.
Yeah, so I have my degree in English from Christendom College, and I have a law degree from Ave Maria. But I soon realized that the practice of law was not where I was headed and had a family instead. Became a homeschooling mom, and as time went on, I had some chances to do some things, and I knew Therese Prudlow from college, and she was like, hey, we might have something. And I said, okay, let me see. And so I've now been here for about 5 years. My 2 older boys are off in the working world, young adults, but my youngest is going to be a freshman at Kolbe this coming year, which is kind of crazy to think about. But it's been good. And I teach a lot of middle school English and literature. I teach ancient Roman literature foundations. And then I've been teaching American civilization, which is going to be just asynchronous now. And then I teach American government, which is always a really fun class. So I'm excited to hear Dr. Mehan because we have the literature and the history and politics and all that stuff. So
you can see why we brought Neva in. Yeah, exactly. Well, very good. It's great to have you back and to get you talking about some of your areas of expertise here. I think this is going to be great. So, Dr. Mehan, please tell us about yourself and your background and help us get to know you a bit.
So I product of mostly Catholic education. Then I did last 3 years. I went to a public school. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. Went to the University of Dallas. Tried to do a politics and English double major, but then they told me one of the requirements I couldn't take as a senior. It's called junior poet. I should have figured that out, but I didn't get it. So I righted that wrong years later after teaching at a prep school, the Heights School for Boys. Then I left for grad school, went back to UD, and got a master's in English, righting an old wrong and finishing that concentration. And got a PhD in literature, but kind of a politics literature crossover, studying Shakespeare, Thomas More, Seneca, and Cicero on leadership education, kind of exactly sort of crossing with poetry and politics. And then I did that not to go to the academy. Actually, I did it to basically get better at designing curriculum for the Heights and our colony schools, which we were kind of hitting a wall of expertise. And so some of us went back to school to do that. So I wrote all my papers on sort of pedagogy, education, curriculum, sort of always with that angle, not perfectly, but, and then went back, taught there, built a couple new courses, helped run their Jackson Scholars Honors Thesis, a kind of rhetoric and composition, very high level. And then I built AmCore, which is sort of a combination of American literature, with the epic tradition, but mostly American literature and U.S. history. And then I taught AP U.S. history. So very much Neva and I are similar journeys, minus the law degree. And then at a certain point, I started adjuncting. I did curriculum consultations for Hillsdale. I started doing speech writing for sort of, big wigs in Washington on the side. Um, and then I started writing kids' books as well. And then I started adjuncting for Hillsdale in DC. And then when Hillsdale wanted to start a master's in government on Capitol Hill, I did a dissertation on basically sort of founding or pre-founding era leadership education. So what better sort of study to revivify the art of government? So I got to help build and design that curriculum and got to teach the first class and of the thing. And I've been associate dean, helping to basically run the DC campus and teaching more than a full load. We use every part of the Buffalo out of Hillsdale's forward operating base in the DC swamp. But so it's been great. It's been very busy, but that's what I do. And now I do curricular planning. I've helped the state of Florida with its civics programs, Arkansas, Louisiana. I'm on that K-12 advisory board for Hillsdale and all their charter schools. That's what I helped. I don't know if you're familiar with the Phoenix Declaration, but the kind of 10-point plan for how to reform the charter and public schools. But that's kind of my cottage stuff is I'm a professor of government, but education, kid lit, and curricular reform are the sorts of things I do on the side for fun.
Good to see it all coming together in the books you have published in the past few years. So we're going to talk more about those. I'm curious though if you'll say some more about your own formation in the classical education that you yourself have, and now in your work developing, I love this quote, well and wisely trained citizens. So can you speak a bit more on the classical education dimension of it?
Yes. So University of Dallas, as many of you know, is a kind of core curriculum, both undergrad and it's the rarest of things, a PhD, where you have 3 years basically of required courses. It's more great books than just very classical, but the crossover and the mix is quite intense. One of my principal studies has been rhetorical philosophy, right? And I mean that carefully, not just rhetoric, rhetorical philosophy, which I think is a very important way to teach rhetoric, is to make sure it's wrapped up in the truth, right?
Okay.
But that's been a kind of a very sort of important part of it. And then some of you may know Dr. Jerry Wegemer, who's the sort of world's expert on Thomas More and the sort of Christian humanists of the early modern period. Before I went to get my PhD, I was a teaching assistant every summer on a 3-credit course in England on Thomas More and Shakespeare, then just Thomas More. Basically a summer intensive 3-credit course on Thomas More and the arts of liberty, or the liberal arts, and how he trained himself in, grammar, logic, rhetoric, history, the law, all these liberal arts that Cicero talks about. So I got deep into educational theory and how it teaches people to be leading citizens, as Cicero would put it. In one sense, leading citizen in America, we're of ambitious and good republic. A leading citizen just means citizen. Like, you got to be good. You have to vote. You're going to be responsible. You got to take care of yourself. So I've had a long familiarity with the early moderns, Shakespeare, Chaucer, Moore, and Erasmus. And then another major part of it is I think one of the great propounders of the liberal arts and classical ed is Cicero. So Thomas More, Shakespeare, and Cicero and Seneca are my sort of major authors that I know well, teach and study a lot, and do scholarship on. And I'm writing a big book on Cicero, and that's where I've come out of it. And then just practicing it as a teacher for 20 plus years in a prep school. You gotta read your posterior analytics for fun, right? So you can get better at teaching the logic course that I had to teach. Like you learn on the job. The old joke: teach it. I haven't even read it. I haven't even taught it yet. Sort of.
Well, so considering all of that, I'm wondering now about the books that you have published for children and families. how did those come to be? Where was this like, how about I write these books?
So I always enjoyed writing as a child. I kept a journal and, wrote poetry and, tried to get good at that, mostly for fun. It's kind of just a hobby. I thought it was a beautiful thing to do. And then, frankly, getting close to Thomas More, I just learned how much he sacrificed for private, rigorous, sometimes sleepless study to fashion his pen and his tongue such that he could communicate the truth peacefully and in friendship to everyone else around him. And that he invested so much energy in that labor, both of preparation and then public writing. I was sort of, frankly, both in a certain sense, how do you say, humbled, but also moved, right? Sort of like, wow, I think I'm going to be this great civic actor. I was a, student government president, valedictorian, sort of going to go help the world in Washington. And then I'm like, oh, I'm nowhere close to prepared. And here's more with just this generous, magnanimous heart, just preparing every night, like getting up in the middle of the night and writing and studying for hours. So I kind of like, well, I'm not Thomas More. I can't stay up all night. I have to get 7 hours of sleep, but I will do my best. And so I started writing at night, just trying different types of writing to get better. So I'd try diatribe, I'd try history, I'd try reporting, I'd try haikus, I'd try fables. And that was the grist for my first book. I would do these sort of, I was very moved also by studying in college and grad school, Plato's Phaedo, right? Here he is, Socrates condemned to death. And what's he doing? What's the last thing he's doing? Well, the second to last. The last thing is philosophizing with his friends. But before that, the weeks before they come in to philosophize with him, he's setting Aesop's fables in verse. And I'm like, oh, that's a very interesting. Why would he do that? And so you think, and it's basically a discussion, Plato, about body and soul and how you have to engage the body too. So you need images and you need rhyme and meter, and you can't just have ideas. You actually have to communicate them to the whole person. And so that got me thinking about my first book, Mehan's Mammals, Mr. Mehan's Mildly Amusing Mythical Mammals. Which, the publisher said, please don't do that. And I said, but it's so much fun.
It's great.
It's just, I can't. I once was doing an interview on television in a local Ohio news station. And the sort of Good Morning America local guy, this nice guy, was reading the teleprompter. And he goes, I'm here with Dr. Matthew Mehan. No, it's Mehan, but whatever. I'm here with Dr. Matthew Mehan and his book. And he looked at me. He saw the teleprompter, this long title, looked at me like, I'm going to kill you.
Oh no!
I'm sorry. Just Mehan's Mammals. Just say Mehan's Mammals. But that was the seed of the first book, and it was also those fables. Some of them found their way. Different ones that didn't go in the first book found their way into this book, the American Book of Fables. So that genre I took to it, and because I was a teacher, it very much fit the sort of things I wanted to do. So, and I love animals too. I'm actually like without any credentials of any kind, a hobby zoologist. Like I love animal behavior. I love nature videos. I like going out and bird watching and studying animal behavior. I like taking the kids out. Like I love, I used to go to the zoo every weekend when I was a kid. So, God puts these little loves in your hearts and then he makes a cocktail out of them. And now I do this, which is hilarious.
It's amazing to see it, how it has come to fruition that way. Yep.
Yeah, so a little bit, just as I think and hoping that students and their families listen to this. And one of the things I'm always encouraging the students is that good writing is good editing. And that I keep trying to tell them no real writer like types it out and then sends it off to be printed, like without reading it over, without going through several editions. And so I'd love to hear kind of what your process was like. How many edits did you go through? What was that process like?
So in the writing of this last work, which was much more, frankly, time compressed, I had, A250. So I had a deadline for the semi-quincentennial. American Book of Fables has to come out before July 4th, 2026. So, and I also had to wait on grant money for the artwork to see whether the book could really be launched. Because we won a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to help basically pay for the research so the book was compressed. That said, I mean, even under time constraints, nothing left without me reading it 3 times and my wife reading it at least once, and then other people and friends reading it as well. So, my father is a writer. And he would always just tell me, Matthew, the editor is your friend, the editor is your friend, the editor is your friend. Now repeat after me. I wanted to make sure that, I found one typo in the book as printed, but man, I was, and I'm like, no, it's like the Navajo blankets, right? There's like one error, so it's not godlike, but I really didn't want error. So just as a matter of grammatical, I really wanted to put a fine-tooth comb to respect the reader and to, give glory to God and do it well. Yeah, so I always write, reshape, and then edit. And then I actually optimally, my wife reading it after the kids go to bed when she's tired and kind of exhausted and slightly irritable. I call it the angry mom or the tired mom edit, which is like the best because, I have my passions and my little darlings and things. And she's like, that's stupid. Like that, I don't like that. I think that's a waste.
Unfiltered.
Wants to read that sentence and you're like, fine, it's gone. Like, so she was a very wonderful pruner of my excesses because she loves my books, but she also loves things to be simple and clear, and I like games and puzzle, so it's a good combo. So I don't know if that helps, but every once in a while, for instance, I wrote one poem. I wrote the whole thing on an airplane flying over the Grand Tetons, looking at God's grandeur. And it's a 20-line poem, and it's probably one of the best things I've ever written. And I wrote it basically in a sitting. I was using very tight craft. I had hours to do it on the plane, and I did very mild edits afterwards and didn't touch it. Another one that I'm really proud of about a lightning bug and the principles of sort of nature and freedom and how God made us free, but in a certain way, and how we need to be gentle with stewardship of even the animals, right? And sort of respect their freedom in a kind of analogous, funny way. Sort of let the lightning bug out of the can. That one, I went through like 100 edits, like just scrapped it, just back and forth. It was like, I knew that this could be a good poem, but it took forever and it just didn't come. And it was more of like, sort of, Jubian, like, why God, sort of like fix this poem, so it varies. It does vary.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this about your process too. So one of the things that's kind of fascinating about this book, and I haven't been able to do a deep dive, but I've gone through it, is you intersperse these stories, some based on classical stories, some based on news stories, and then they're interspersed with these like letters from Washington to the Hebrew people and court cases and original documents. Which came first, the stories or the documents you wanted to use?
So that's a great question. So I'm a firm believer in form, right? That an artist needs to take on limitations. And that's actually the glory of art, is to sort of deal with the limitations. And so when you set yourself a series of limitations, then it's sort of, okay, I'm going to use iambic pentameter. I'm going to use the sonnet form. I'm going to give it this narrative voice. Like what I did first is lay down a lot of sort of Lilliputian chords, sort of like, how am I going to set up a kind of system or natural set of laws for the work? And then how can I work inside that lattice work and grow a beautiful rose bush, right? Like, because I think if you set up those rules, just like a rose bush, your native creative power, if it grows without those rules, you'll get a bush and it'll just be kind of roiling around on the ground and trampled and muddy. But if you actually set up a scaffold and a set of rules, then it grows all the way up. And in fact, in the middle of the book, I have one of my favorite fables about the lattice and the rose bush. overlooking the Grand Canyon. And that's an image of America, the constitutional frameworks, and the natural people and their natural rights and natural law and their human nature given by God. But also the carpenter, right? There's the framers of the Constitution, but then there's the carpenter's son, right? Christ, right? Sort of, and our nature is built up by grace and by good governance, right? By grace and natural things. But I think poetry is the same way, analogously. And so the first thing that came up with it was actually the sort of the setup. I'm going to have a section for littles, a section for middles, and a section for bigs. And they're all going to link up like a canto, like they're going to build on each other and be related, but you could read them separately. And those are going to be based on regions. And so I have local history, strictures, and needs. And I have natural ecology of that area and the animals of that area. And then I also have those words of the declaration. So those are my themes. So that's how it starts, to my mind, is I laid out this form. And then once I had that form, then I was freer to just basically, sort of riff and find things to grow into that form. And so the answer is the form was first, and then I started thinking about what combination of story and primary source history can be woven. And I don't know if you've gotten through the parts. I've kind of invented a new genre. Like I did, there's a new genre. Like I thought it was like appropriate for America. We're pretty innovative and inventive, like flight, jazz, the computer. Like, we're pretty cool. Like we do some neat inventive stuff. Like why can't we have a little tiny modest genre innovation? So
have you named your genre?
I haven't yet. So feel free, Neva, if you have an idea. Yeah, there have been like all kinds of failed attempts at like hyphenated nonsense, trying to do it. But the humanity, his sort of superpower in the book, and he appears as an intermittent character throughout, starts in the Everglades, and then he goes all over the country. But he has this power where he can basically produce a historical volume at will, sort of magically, and sort of the joke is, and he pulled a book from I know not where, like he's even in the water, he's got books. And
that is a superpower I would like.
Exactly. Like always have the Library of Congress at your fingertips or your flippers tips. But so it's like a Animal Farm Socratic dialogue, Aesop's fable, kind of Winnie the Pooh comedy routine kind of combo. But then suddenly it's like wife of Bath proof texting where they're like going back and forth with like, well, but Cotton Mather said this, and like all this sort of it's an unusual, and I wasn't sure it was going to work, and I had a bunch of people read it to kids and read it for out loud. It's like, do you like this? Because I like it, but I'm me, and self-love is deceptive. But I think it works. I think it's actually a kind of charming way of learning history, but it's not like just a vehicle for history. It's actually like the story has rights too, right? I try to make sure that the narrative and the history and the story are like woven together, which is, I think that's very American, frankly, right? We don't have mythical nonsense in our founding. Like a she-wolf didn't feed two twins. No one talked to a naiad or a dryad or some demon in a cow. Like we don't have any of those, or lost to the mists of time, some Salic Frank kind of wandered. Like we know. So how do you sing America in a way that gives glory to God and teaches virtue? And I thought this was a really fun way to do that.
Seems, thinking about America as a nation, dedicated to an idea, that rather than being, a people of blood, there are people united by that idea. I think maybe that's part of what you were getting at. But of course, there's also classical things in there. And how do classical stories relate to the founders and the founding?
So, yeah, leaving aside sort of the blood and soil issue, because it's a tricky one. I prefer to say that America is a dedication to some principles, but and those are sort of eggs, right? And then the nest is a life way, a people, right? And so, yes, is it a bloodline? That feels weird and racist. Is it families with traditions of faith and memory and culture, right? And habit and language and wit and art and etc., right? And dispositions, like the English people are sort of warlike and feisty, right? Sort of like that needs to, Shakespeare was always worried about that. So am I. Like, how do that's a character that we have, and we have to direct it in the right way. So I kind of think in one sense it's both, right? But in either case, in fact, in both that sort of extension of culture back through time and the principles that coalesced in the Declaration of Independence and in our republic, those have deep roots. And I think there's been a kind of American amnesia where it's like, no, Hobbes, Locke, Machiavelli, that's where we got our founding from. And you're like, well, I read everything. Like, I read all the founders, I read all their letters and all their speeches, and like I've read not everything, but a lot of more than most anyone I know as a professor of government and a teacher, and writing these books. And you're like, it's not like that at all, actually. It's deeply natural law, it's deeply Ciceronian, it's deeply Christian. There are deep roots. There are innovations, but they are usually defanged of their worst aspects. My favorite is James Wilson, the founding father and great sort of jurist. He's like, if Locke means this, i.e., what Cicero and the tradition has always meant about natural reason, natural rights, and natural law, then I'm with Locke. If he means this, which he might mean, then I'm not with Locke. But I'm with Locke. Like, that's a very clever man who knows there are some innovations. There's some things he's seeing that I haven't been said this clearly or this well or this recently. And so he's very useful to me. But the idea that everyone is just the product of the last burp of authorship in the 1700s and the Enlightenment is, to my mind, a very bad way. And I think a lot of Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of conservatives, a lot of people are drinking that swill and going, yeah, well, therefore America is not good. And so I want to sort of show the deep roots, because those are the roots that are withering, right? And those are the ones that will actually regrow the rose bush, so to speak, not to be all on point with my metaphors, but.
Yeah, I really love that, because having read those names, Locke, Machiavelli, Hobbes, all of these people, you think, okay, I can see from the founding fathers that they were aware of man's capacity to do wrong or to be corrupted. But you so clearly see their understanding of the goodness and the greatness of man and his capacity for good and for excellence too. So I love what you just said there. I think it's very clear that they yeah.
No, sorry. They had deep knowledge of Ciceronian humanitas, that optimistic side of what human nature can do when governed and virtuous. And that's why humanity is my lead character. And this is a fun fact. Cicero is featured, his quotes, some of his words, many of his moral lessons are in the fables. In fact, Cicero was by far the most influential thinker on the founding, and most modern scholars, historians, and people don't even know Cicero. He was so ubiquitous that it was considered gauche to quote him during the founding. So when they go back and get on Google and search who was mentioned the most, it's actually the least familiar people get mentioned the most, but they don't have the wit and wisdom to see that. And so there's a lot of clunky, wrong-headed scholarship about the founding, when it'd be like saying, may the force be with you. That's episode 4, minute 26, A New Hope, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, if you said that in like public, people would be like, he's a German spy, like, get him out, or whatever. Like, I don't know what this is. Like, you're an alien. Like, they'd assume you'd like blink sideways or something.
Yes.
But that's how ubiquitous Cicero and the Roman teachers were. And that's like, oh, what a thing is man, this sort of, that Ciceronian and Senecan humanitas, this human nature can be high too. And yes, low, like you got to do both. You have to be wise as a serpent, innocent as a dove, right? Matthew 10:16, which is, I put that verse right at the front of the book. So.
I think if for any of our listeners who haven't seen the book yet, and we keep referencing Hugh Manatee, yes, Hugh is an actual manatee, and you'll see him riding in balloons and cars and traversing. So I just realized we keep mentioning humanity, and people might just be wondering why are we pronouncing humanity in such an odd way here? But no, it's Hugh the manatee right there.
It's a walking, talking dad joke.
Very clever.
I do love it.
Yeah, I think that's great. We read on friendship with the sophomores, and they were just like, "Oh, this is such good advice," and this is like it's so fresh, you know. I think they're surprised when they read it that it is so relevant to their own lives. So I'm glad to see those references in there.
I was thinking about our 10th graders too, like they're speaking right to their dear. Yep. Very good. So we have been discussing the American Book of Fables, obviously the timing of the book's publication with the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. Is there more you want to say, Dr. Mehan, about the illustrations or other aspects of the book itself?
Oh, well, I mean, I could go on forever, right? It's dangerous to ask an author such an open-ended question. But so just as a matter of kind of craft, the John Folley, my illustrator for all three of my books, and my dear friend, he's a realist impressionist who can trace his master apprenticeship through Paul Ingbertson's studio, but back to the Boston School, all the way to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, all the way back, master apprentice to Raphael's workshop in Florence, like the actual. So he is the sort of unbroken line of Renaissance excellence, but also adapted with Impressionism. So the paintings, there's 13 beautiful oils, huge oil paintings, 3 foot by 5 foot. There's 40 watercolors, and then there's hundreds of pen and inks. And we wanted all three. Pen and ink is sort of like a little nod to the Declaration, right? And some of, and the 20th century Aesop fables, which were very kind of a lot of black and white scrawly art. Ours is better mostly, but then sort of slowly comes into watercolor and then comes into full weight and depth which is sort of like the Declaration. It's a motive force document that has now been lived out for 250 years. So it starts in pen and ink and black and white on parchment and then becomes life, right? It's lived out. So that was a kind of nod. And all of the paintings have like, I know this is for audio, but you guys can see behind me video. One of the paintings has this beautiful garland, which is actually a reference to Bramudi, the Italian who painted the interiors of the U.S. Capitol, right? So, you go to chapter 5, which just takes up the word liberty from the Declaration. It's set on the Great Plains, right? Sort of, it seems like where the buffalo roam, you can go anywhere on the Great Plains, but it turns out actually you have to follow the rules and find water and safety and shade, right? Sort of like freedom has rules, even when it looks like you can do anything, you really can't without, suffering needlessly and causing others to suffer. But the painting for that one takes place in front of Pikes Peak, where Purple Mountain's Majesty was actually written, right? That famous line was written on Pikes Peak. And we actually have that. And then the color scheme of that painting is a reference to a famous Remington painting that takes place in the region. So there's all these sort of threads, and that the artwork, but also the literature even more so, just like I'm constantly threading references. I'm working with different primary sources quietly all the time. And there's also all these sort of local tie-ins, like the Boy Who Cried Wolf one takes place on a real island that's next to a wolf preserve. The only red wolf preserve left is nearby, and the families that come out to rescue the boy from crying wolf are the Body family, and so there's all these jokes about nobody is here, and like, and it's just, but that's a real family that settled that island south of Kitty Hawk, and then he cries wolf by lighting a signal rocket, right? Which is a kind of reference to Flight, Kitty Hawk, Cape Canaveral down south, and right. So there's just every one of the fables is full of life and full of discovery and full of things that can sort of jog the memory or excite the family to further discussion or kick off a Googling event where you learn a lot more about an animal or a place. And
I think that speaks right to something that Neva picked up on about fables and how they help us with analytical skills, looking more deeply into things. So, Neva, would you like? I would leave that to you to present more cogently than I
Yeah,
said.
just one thing I like to do with middle schoolers is start with an Aesop fable, and something like the boy who cried wolf, and then we'll say, oh, don't cry wolf. I was like, is there anything else we can learn from this? And usually we eventually come out to, if you're an adult, you probably have to check, right? Just like if your little sister says, I have to go to the bathroom when she's 3 years old and it's at nighttime, maybe she's just trying to not go to bed, but maybe she has to go. So you always have to kind of let her go. And talking about like how you can have different lessons for different stages of life, but that there's more than maybe one story in there. And it seems like there's a lot of illusion in your stories as well. But how do you see, especially since you have those levels, how do you see young readers growing in from those littles to those bigs, and what kind of growth they would see?
So I think it's my responsibility as a poet, right? One of the things the poet's in charge of doing for his community is training up what Chaucer called their good mother wit, which Thomas More then added to that line, without which all other learning is half lame, right? Meaning that sort of, and fables, as you said, Neva, fables are the stock and trade for this. They're very useful. And one of the things I did is I researched the founding imagination, but I also researched the fable tradition. I did a lot of sort of scholarly work in the fable tradition, going to conferences, writing papers, reading old manuscripts. Like I got my hands dirty in the stacks. And I realized the fable tradition isn't for children, actually. That's a 20th century adaptation. It's supposed to be for littles, middles, and bigs, just like my book. And in fact, most of the old fable books you wouldn't ever give to a child because some of the material's way too adult, like saucy beyond saucy, like just not okay. And that's not even like, oh, they were pagans. Like even the Christians, like it's complicated adult matter. Now all of my stuff's basically PG with maybe a little violence, but when there's violence in the big section, I even warn in the story, like I have Hugh's like, you might want to ask your little chickadee chick to close his ears for this scary moment, just sort of give parents a warning if they're very concerned. But I think most of it's acceptable for family reading. But the fable tradition, if you find a simple fable, it's usually next to a complexifying one, right? And some of them are very complicated. And even the ones that are simple, as you noted, Neva, are seemingly simple. And there's usually something wrong. And often a lot of people have gotten rid of the moral, but the moral was actually not making it simpler. The moral was making it more complicated. So oftentimes, and I did a lot of this, where there's something happening and then the morals give, you're like, wait a minute, like, is that the lesson in here? I mean, yeah, it is. I can see that lesson is there, but you sort of had to make a move to get there. And I'm making it with you, but let's go back and look at what was the lesson that you covered up with the moral, right? And so this kind of training of one's good mother wit, right? We have to be wise as serpents, right? And this is Shakespeare has the famous line about Thomas More in his play about Thomas More, that More greatly married wit and wisdom, right? The marriage of wit and wisdom, right? How do you be wise as a serpent, innocent as a dove? The fable tradition does that. And so what I try to do responsibly is I have sections for littles, right? Which frankly are compressed, very difficult pastoral poems for adults with lots of deep themes in them, but the children have a very easy rhyme before them. But it starts to alert them to simple rhymes are related to liberty. Well, now I need to think about that. And that's a very easy handhold that you start you're in dialogue. But then stupid puns like humanity that I kind of, I make really obvious, like bang on it a few times so everybody gets the joke in case they missed it. That starts to alert you to, oh, there's ironic speech. Things can mean more than one thing. And so you start moving people up step by step. And I think that's how great authors operate. I try to imitate them with sort of giving people handholds where they start to realize things aren't quite what they seem. And then they get sort of engaged in that pursuit, and it becomes a kind of delight of discovery to find, yes, jokes, yes, puns, yes, some symbols, but deeper meanings, deeper unfolding of the mystery of life and creation and our relationship to God and these somewhat mysterious principles of equality and, justice.
I tend to spend a lot of time thinking about the tendency toward being very black and white about things, seeing things either this way or that way, and how what you're just speaking to, how those two intersect when we know in ourselves or in those near us a tendency to lean toward the black and white. How do we sort of enter into drawing out the deeper meanings and sort of that, and maybe this kind of harkens back to your M5 book with the sort of mental ecology, like the discomfort of that space between, I think it's either this or this, and actually there's a whole lot more to unpack there.
I actually think about this a lot because I actually, it's one of the things that I learned from Cicero and Thomas More very deeply, and from Shakespeare and Chaucer too, and in a certain sense from Homer and Virgil, but like this idea of you can tell someone something and they'll go, yeah, got it. But it's not in them yet, right? And sort of the getting someone to really take on and live something, that takes time. That takes a lot more work. And so I think about these concerns like that as a kind of mountain to climb. Like I've got to try to scale the human heart and help, in a certain sense, conquer it, not tyrannically, but with love, like conquer it for the truth, right? And how do you conquer the heart? And one of the things I think is so important is, and this is humanity actually models this a lot, is patience. And in fact, it's a major theme in the book of how do you remain patient with reality, with the mysteries of providence, with suffering, with other people. There's another character that he meets in New England that has a whole section on sort of the difficulties in patience versus impatience. With sort of, there's good Puritans and there's bad Puritans, right? Sort of like there's the fiery Puritan who keeps losing it, and then there's the guys who are like, hey, calm down, sort of be patient. But they meet every region that Hugh meets, he meets a new creature, a new American creature, and each of them represents some aspect of human nature. And he meets Cuddy the porcupine, and he's affection, like just the sort of affective side of man. But Cuddy the porcupine always wants to cuddle and hug. So, but that's a thing, right? It's kind of a metaphor for, yes, we have an affective side, but our affections often prick us and cause us trouble, right? Our passions get out of control. But it's also a kind of image of friendship. Hugh patiently and prickingly hugs the porcupine, right? Sort of like your prickly, cranky Yankee New Englander who's not as warm and fuzzy as your Southerner, your Midwesterner, right? But sort of like, it's no offense to everybody, but it's true. I love my New Englanders, but they're not as initially friendly.
Yeah, I grew up in New England, and I live in Missouri, so I
know the difference.
I see what you're talking about.
I'm a Missouri native, so the old sort of oversharing friendly Midwesterner is me to a T. But humanity and Cuddy, right? Like that's a kind of image of patience in friendship, but it's also like that's the virtue that holds things in tension. Not because they're always in tension, because that's actually to say everything's complicated. That's impatience too. To give up on seeing the full truth, right? Is sort of like, well, we can't really know, or it's always everything's in tension. It's like, or there's a higher harmony you just don't see yet because God made the world good, right? And so that's one. And then the other virtue that I think is really important for this, that sort of epistemic journey that people go on in their lives, trying to make judgments like this, is optimism, hope, lowercase h and uppercase h. Right. And that's something America has had in spades, and I'm watching it leach away in a very scary way because our poets are very hopeless now. even like, oh, that's such a great show, or that was such a good book. I was like, it was very interesting tragedy, but not Greek, Roman, or Christian tragedy, because there was no, that line in Lord of the Rings. I think it's Return of the King, when the stars open up briefly and they see the stars above the trouble, and it's Tolkien sort of reminding everybody like there's tragedy, but there is a higher and grand divine comedy. That's not we used to have that deep in our bones, right? That things will work out. That if we apply ourselves, right, even if we die, there is resurrection, there is restitution, there is reward, there is a payoff, there is a promised land. And that kind of optimism is so important for a happy and healthy life and for a self-governing republic. It's absolutely indispensable, right? But I think it's also very important for if you're going to be patiently remain in tension, not sort of like quick judgments, simple peas and carrots, black and white, right? You need to hope that you can see, and hope that your study and your life and your preparation, your virtue and your counsel will yield these things. And you need to be patient. And so those two are major themes in the book.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, I know we're getting close on time. One of these questions here that Neva presented that I also wanted to ask of you, it's sort of a leap from where the vein we've been in. So let's we'll just quit wasting time and ask the question about what healthy patriotism looks like, family life, society.
Yeah. So I'm an old school, on this, that the three virtues are related. They are religion, piety, and patriotism. The one is dutiful and grateful service and devotion to God. The one is dutiful and grateful service and devotion to one's family and ancestors. And one is dutiful and grateful relations with your countrymen and your forebears and forefathers. They're all related, because you're basically saying, I'm thankful for who gave me life and government, God, parents and family, and the government, the politics. And so patriotism, rightly understood, is fundamentally great gratitude. You are thankful for what you've been given, which is why a lot of the way we teach history, some of it's just poison, some of it's just trash, and some of it is really good people trying to be very fair, but they're not actually being witty wise about how to do that. In that they're sort of like, no, I just present good and bad together, and that's just all there is. It's like, well, but you actually need to present the good with a little more magnification, right? Because you don't want to destroy the spirit of gratitude for the goods given. Because there's always sin, but if you just go equal time for slavery and, liberty, well, but that's actually not good for the soul. Now, an adult mind can be told, obviously, this was a grave evil, and obviously this was a great good, right? But if evil is not as good, then your history teaching should be, in a certain sense, represent that a little, as opposed to equal time, which is what a kind of post-Enlightenment scientific account of history, even amongst our very best people, oftentimes think this way, but they're not thinking about A, metaphysical reality, that good is greater than evil, and so good deserves more of a pride of place on a metaphysical level, and B, on a moral level, you need to be pedagogically careful to emphasize the positive, because you do need to have that gratitude. And so proper patriotism is expressed through, yes, signs of gratitude and honor and reverence, right, for the founding fathers, but also not just for the founding fathers, the founding generation, but everyone who came before. I tell my kids, and it's hokey, but like, you drink a glass of cold water from the faucet and you're like, do you know how many people died making the water treatment plants and the water system in this region? It's not zero, right? Like, people died laying the foundation so you have clean water in your home. You should be grateful, right? Like, that's your fellow patriots, your fellow citizens are part of patriotism as well. It's not just for the founders. It's for anyone who contributed to your life and governance, and voters and citizens and workers, and those are all part of it. And the reason why it's so important is, one, it's right. it's right to give thanks when someone does you a favor, right? But it's also an analog to prepare you for religion, to do the same with God, who's harder to see in some sense. So it's a kind of tangible practice for the higher salvation, rites of salvation and gratitude and thanks. But it's also nobody does nothing in the world unless they're grateful. You don't do a good deed, you don't sacrifice, you don't serve unless you have a certain kind of sort of supposite gratitude for the gifts you've been given, right? And you just sort of like, well, but God gave me this, so I should use it. That's like the obvious one. Like someone's like, I should teach because God gave me a mind and a good education. I had these good teachers, so I'm going to teach, right? That's gratitude. Like literally the first operation is, oh, I'm thankful for this stuff I got, so I should then give it back. So if you don't have patriotism, you don't have a sacrificial culture. You don't have a service-oriented buildings. You don't have civilization, because civilization is always either building or decaying, right? Sort of what my old joke is, civilization is definitionally is putting your children through rigors you did not suffer. Like you're basically asking your kids to be better than you, right? Like do awesome things, right? So I think it's hopefully that answers the question, but I think it's just so important, and I really wanted to foster it in this book.
I'd been thinking when I read this in terms of, sort of the Burkean moral imagination and how this can help develop that, which I think it does. It also reminds me of like the old, like, in early America where they have, the Bible and Pilgrim's Progress and the family read it together. And so this is something a family can read together, maybe bring back people reading out loud while their family like does other things, get up some knitting for some of the kids, whatever their little handiworks are, someone reads, it'd be great.
If you go on my Instagram, a colleague of mine is a award-winning crochet and fiber artist knitter. And she actually knitted a number of beautiful images from the book, and I've been putting them up on my Instagram channel. It's very fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the people are reading the book, and they'll read for the littles, the rhymes, and show them the artwork, and then they'll read some of the fables, and for the older kids, and then they'll start to read the bigger stuff. And the kids actually are still interested because some of it's these cool stories and primary sources, but then the littles actually start to fall asleep. and then everybody goes to bed and the adults keep reading the big section. So.
Yep. Beautiful. Well, it's truly a gift. Your generosity in this book and your previous books, there's a whole host of additional resources, not just this sizable, substantial books. There's a whole lot more besides for folks to discover upon as they're either reading along or at the completion of the book. So there's all that. Is there anything that we haven't gotten to, or parts where the conversation moved on and y'all had more you wanted to say on those particular points?
Oh, I had one question. This should be a quick yes, no question. So you call them Father Goose's melodies. Is there a melody that you have in mind for those melodies?
So, I just wanted to remind everyone that those were songs. Most of them were songs. And I actually take a lot of very old folk songs and adapt them. And that was actually one of the most laborious parts of the entire work, is making old songs new again, and taking old farming songs from 15th century England and adapting them to the Midwest farm culture, but also modern English, but keeping the meter. So I have some melodies for some of them, myself, but I also just wanted to encourage people, like, you can turn these into songs, right? This is the grist of if you have a guitar or a violin or a piano, like you can write a song. I'd love people to start sending me beautiful melody versions of these rhymes and poems and songs. So
you should run a contest.
It's actually coming. Yeah.
Okay, keep us posted on that. Okay, I was going to ask you for suggestions on how Kolbe families can enjoy the book while also utilizing its lessons, but you've hit several of those along the way. So if there are any more to add to that, please feel free. I know several have come up so far.
Yeah, I mean, my only sort of closing plea for your listeners and your community is, just read the whole book. It's a funny compilation. It's a sort of mysterious bag of cats. Like, it's a strange book. But we've had very strange books in the past that we used to read and love. And even though it's not exactly what everybody's used to for a children's book, it doesn't answer to the very kind of comfy expectations of Make Way for Ducklings or, Cat in the Hat. If you give it a chance, it is very rich and will move you in the right direction. And what I really want, I don't want to be famous. I want the book to be famous, which is why it's not all me. Like, I wanted it to be mixed with the tradition and I can just disappear. But I want this book to be in the bloodstream of the United States of America because I wrote it, and I hope people will join me in distributing it, that I wrote it as a proto-evangelium, right? Good seed falls upon good soil, and that's when it bears the most fruit. Well, that begs the question, well, how does one get good soil, right? And this is what these kinds of books do if they're done well. And our children's lit is either cute, pretty, fun, or witty, but it's not always witty and wise and beautiful. And I just want to do that all because we need to, the imagination needs to be restored. The moral imagination is like furniture, Burke sort of alludes to, the sort of the furnishings, right? It's like we have a very sad, and it's IKEA and it's gray toned, and we need a much more florid American imagination. And I think that's the good soil for the faith.
Thank you for helping us cultivate that. So in our show notes, we'll have a link to the book. Dr. Mehan, are there other ways you like for folks to connect with you, or is the book the main one?
The book is great. If people do social media, I do it to launch the book mostly, and then sometimes like put out my popular political writing. I'm a professor of government, so I do that. But that's MT Mehan, so MTMEHAN. You'll think less of me, but more often if you follow me on social media. But I have Instagram, same address, and Twitter. Facebook's kind of, I don't use. And then if you want, I have a YouTube channel. You can see the trailers for my other books. That's just Mr. Mehan, but you just Google or YouTube search any of the books. I made these beautiful trailers that show the illustrations and kind of give a little bit of an expo of the book.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll link all those in our show notes along with links to Kolbecast episodes, Neva's, where we met Neva. We sure have enjoyed this conversation with you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mehan, and we would love to have you back to visit with us again. And congratulations, and thank you for this gift you've given to all of us.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful conversation.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam.